Greetings and welcome back to the One Code Camp channel. So this is part 3 of the DOM manipulation series. So this is going to go more in depth on the relationships between structure, style, and behavior. And we're going to go over the layers of web design and why these are vital in creating our web pages and making them dynamic and beautiful. To truly understand the art of web design, we must start at the foundation, and that would be the structure of a website. So picture it as the architectural blueprint, setting the stage for everything that follows. And this is where our HTML or hypertext markup language comes into play. So HTML is not just about paragraphs and headings, it is actually the backbone that supports images, links, and overall organization of your content. So this would be like the structural engineer of your website. And yeah, let's delve first into the first layer and unveil the secrets of our structure, also known as our HTML. So the first thing we're going to do is download Visual Studio Code. So if you still don't have Visual Studio Code, that's fine. We can just go to the official website and download it accordingly for our operating system. And then we can open a folder using File, Open Folder, and open the folder for this project. In this case, I made my structure, style, and behavior, so we can discuss the differences. So now that it's open, we can go ahead and create our index.html. All right, and once this is open, we could save some time and just type out the boilerplate that we'll need using an Emmet abbreviation called HTML:5. So this is just the boilerplate that we need for creating an HTML document. All right, in this case, we just have to worry about changing the title, and we can just call it structure versus style versus behavior. This should be good. All right. And for our body, we could start with some structural components for this. So the first thing we're going to do is make a div. Oh, here. Let's make a div here. And in here, we could have some H1s that are just going to be containers for these random texts. And another way to display text using HTML is through block quotes, in case you want to quote something or someone. And in this case, we're going to encapsulate it in some I tags to make it italicized. And we could just do lorem64, this just to generate 64 words with the lorem. And there you go. And inside this block quote, we could make a paragraph to signify who did the quote. So in this case, we're going to say Mr. Man, as he is very magnanimous. All right. So this case, we're going to give this a class of align right, because I want this to align right later on. And that should be it for this block quote. So I want to see how it looks like currently. And to do this, I'm going to use Live Server. So if you still don't have Live Server, that's fine. You go to extensions and search up Live Server, and it'll be the first one that pops up by Ritwick Day. So this just to make sure that your auto refresh is working. So every time you save, it will refresh the page to make sure that your changes are always appearing. So we can just right click and open with Live Server. And let's just give it a moment to start. And there you go. Now this is what it currently looks like. Very rudimentary, but that's fine. As we said, the HTML only deals with the structure of our page. So it's not supposed to look pretty yet. So the next thing we're going to do is import in an image. So in this case, this image is going to have an src of a link. So this link is actually the Unsplash API. So don't be too scared of what that means. It's just being able to generate a random image every time we refresh the page. So we could just say the alt is random photo. So in case the image fails to load, it will just output random photo as its text. All right. And that should be it for our div. So this div is just maybe for our first section of the website. So this is really good in a structural sense because we know what is supposed to happen inside the first part of our page, and we were able to structure it. So in this next part, we're just going to make a little separation here using a BR tag. And we're going to create a table. So inside this table, we're going to have different parts. A T head for the header, a T body for our body, and a T foot for our footer, just to signify which parts belong to which. So in this T head, we're going to start with a table row, or TR, and in here we're going to put TH, or table headers. So these will be the headers for the columns. So this would signify what the columns mean. So in this case, you could say it could be age or name, but for simplicity's sake, we could just say column 1, 2, and 3. So don't mind the image refreshing a lot on the right. It's just live server refreshing to catch up with our changes. And in that case, now we are done with the T head. So we can move on to T body. In this case, we can make another table row, and this time we're going to make TDs, or what we call table data. And here we could just do some sample table data and just call it 1, 2, and 3. All right. And we could make more. Let's say, we could say this is 4, 5, 6. And I think that'll do for our table. So we were able to see that it actually generated a table, although it looks pretty basic right now and not much styling. It is actually a table. So the last thing we're going to do is create a footer for this. So we're going to make another table row here and just create a table data with a call span of 3. So this is just going to say how many columns will this row take up. So in this case, it's going to take up a whole row since it's only 3 columns. So we're going to say this is the footer, and we could see it down here. All right, and that does it for a basic table. So after that, we're going to do another separation. And in this case, we're going to create a form, just so we could cover all our bases here. When we're discussing structure, style, and behavior, we do everything. So in this case, let's first start with a label. So you could say label for name. And the first input, which may be pretty obvious by now, is going to be our name. So in this case, we're going to give it an ID of name, so it's linked up to this label. And it's actually self-closing, so we could give it that. And let's fix it up. There you go. And in this case, we could actually just duplicate these. And we could give it a label for age this time. And in this case, we could just make it an input type of number, since an age is supposed to be a number. And let's make this age as well. All right. So we actually have it here now, and that's going to be it for our form, except we're missing some line breaks and a submit button. So we're just going to make a button here and give it a type of submit. And inside this button, we're going to make it submit. And there you go. Now you can actually see it on the very bottom over here. All right. So that about wraps it up for our HTML actually, because this HTML is really just responsible for putting things where they're supposed to be. Essentially the structure of our data. And we've actually covered a lot of components that are part of an HTML, and this will cover most of your needs if you're going to create an HTML document. So let's just fix this with some formatting. And there you go. Everything looks a lot neater. And now we're going to move on to our styling. So this is our structure. Now we can actually move on to our styling. In this case, now we're going to introduce one more tag, which is the link. And this will be our link to an external file that we're going to use for this HTML. In this case, we could say the href is style.css. Now, you may be asking, where's the style.css coming from? We're actually going to make that file right now. So let's create a new file, and let's call it style.css. All right. And in this case, we are going to make the styling for our page. So for CSS, after our structural framework is in place, it's time to bring our creation to life with style. So this is going to be our second layer of web design, the cascading style sheets, or CSS. So this is going to be the visual appeal, or what will make our website look great, I guess, to use a term. And CSS allows us to control colors, fonts, layouts, and much more. It's basically your palette. If you think yourself as an artist, And this transforms our web structure into a visual masterpiece. So now we're going to explore how to apply CSS to our current HTML structure. So we could start with body, h1, h2, h3, paragraph, ul, li, and I think that's it for what we want to target for this. And we're just going to give it a margin and a padding reset. And we're going to make the box sizing border box to make the margin and padding included for the size of the elements boxes. So what are these boxes actually? So we're going to go into a little bit of inspecting to check out what these boxes are actually. So this is what a box is. So if you see the blue highlight around this block code, now since we made it border box, it now includes the margin and the padding inside this blue box right here. All right. So that's actually it for our style resetting. And now we can target some more stuff. So in this case, we're going to go to body and we're going to give it a font family of, maybe I could just give it Arial. Arial, Helvetica, Sans Serif. So Arial would probably be the default for Windows and Helvetica would be the default for Mac OS. All right. And in this case, we're going to give it a default font size of 16 pixels. A line height of 1.6. A default color of this hex over here. And we're going to give it a background color of this off-white. Or sorry, I guess that is just plain white. And that actually does it for our body. So this actually gives us the ability to change some stuff if we want to. So in case you want to take some inspiration from this current styling, you may do so. And you could change the background color to whatever you want and the default text color as you choose as well. But in this case, this will do. Now we can move on to our block code. And this block code is going to have a width of 70%, a margin of auto, so it will be centered, a margin bottom of 20 pixels, a color of white, a background color of this grayish thing, and a padding of 30 pixels. All right, so this is what it looks like now. It looks a bit better than our default. So this is what our block code looks like currently. So in this case, we're going to target the I inside the block code, if you remember us making that. This is to encapsulate the italicized text. And in this case, we're going to give it a font weight of bold to make the text actually bold. And we can see it here. All right. And in this case, now we are going to add some things before and after the block code italicized text. So when we think of quotes, we always think of the quote symbols. So in this case, we could target block quote I before and block quote I after. And this will have a content of a quote before and after the block quote. So now we could see it here. All right. And that actually does it for our block quote now. So it looks a little bit simpler. And now we can actually target this text here because we want it to align to the right. So if we remember, we actually gave it a class of align right. So we can utilize this with using a dot. So with CSS, a dot would refer to classes and a pound sign would refer to an ID. In this case, we're going to target a class of align right. And we're going to give it a text align of right. Pretty simple. And there you go. Now Mr. Man is on the right. Okay. And that does it for our block quote author. And now we can move on to some more styling. So in this case, I also want to style the headings to make it look a bit more, well, not the font. So in this case, we could say H1, H2, and H3. In case you want to add some H2 and H3 tags, you could give it a color of this. So this is a blue. So I want to make my site blue currently, so that'll do for now. And that does it for our heading. Now if we're going to have some A tags, we could also target those as well. And give it a color of blue as well. And this will take out the text decoration. So every time we hover over a link or if we put a link in our website, it's going to come with a default underline. In this case, we will take it out. And every time we hover on those links, we will put the underline just to signify that we are hovering over that link and it's working. So after that, we're going to add some styling for our paragraphs. Give it a margin bottom, and make it 1 EM. So in this case, this is just for adding a little margin below that is actually responsive depending on our screen size. And after that, we could also target our unordered and ordered lists and also give them a margin bottom of 1 EM. And that does it for our text elements. So in case you want to take inspiration from these or build up on them, you may do so as well. So now we can move on to our images. So we will target the IMG. And in this case, we're going to give it a display of block. So it's going to take, the box is going to take up the whole row instead of just the image. So after that, we're going to give it a margin left of auto. And now it's been able to move to the right. And in this case, we could just take out the left and just give it a margin of auto. So it does left and right. Oh, there you go. That is a lot better. Now it is centered. So after that, we're going to give it a width of 50%. There. So it's a lot less overbearing. And we're going to give it a transition of 0.3 seconds. Now, what is this transition? So this transition is going to be useful later on as we're going to make this image a little dynamic. So that is actually it for our image. And the last thing we could do is target our tables and forms. So now we can move on to the table styles. So you can also take note of these if you want to. We could just make this table styles. And we could start with the table. So for this table, we could give it a width of 80%. All right. So you can see that our table is a lot more spaced out, which looks better than its cramped state a while ago. And we could give it a border collapse. If I could find it, here you go. And this border collapse just collapses borders between table cells. So we could just do collapse over here. And now you can see that everything's a lot more squeezed in together because the borders are also taken into account for the table cell space. All right, and we're going to give it a margin of auto. So it's actually centered in our HTML. And see, there you go. Now it is centered. So after that, we're going to target the table headers, and we're going to give it a background color of the blue that we used a while ago. Going to give it a color of white, a padding of 10 pixels, a text align of left. All right, so that actually looks a bit more styled than a while ago, so that's good. And after that, we're going to target the table data. This table data will have a padding of 10 pixels, a border of 1 pixel solid, and it'll be this gray. So now we can see our table actually looking a lot more styled than before. And in this case, now we could actually access another event, which is actually not an event. This is going to be a method for CSS, and this is targeting the nth child. So since we have multiple rows, the nth child is going to be a different color. So it could actually help with the readability of the table if we make the colors alternating per row. So in this case, we're going to make the background color a bit of an off-white. And now you can see the difference. So it actually looks pretty cool. So in this case, now we can add in one more thing, and that is when we hover. So when we hover over a row, we're going to give it a little color change. So in this case, this should actually be F9, F9, F9. And yep, that is looking a lot better. So every time we hover over it, we give it a little grayish color, and it alternates between a white and an off-white. So that looks pretty good to me. All right. And that should be it for our table. Actually pretty simple, but it actually looks pretty good. So simplicity is good sometimes as well. All right. So that's it for our table. Now we can move on to the last thing that we need for this page, which is the form. So in this case, we could start with the form. And before you do that, let's actually just make a comment here and say form styles, so we don't get lost in our code. In this case, we're going to give it a background color, and we're going to give it a background color of black. So it could signify that it's a different section of our page as well. And the color is going to be white for our text in there, so it's actually readable. All right. Give it a padding of 20 pixels, a max width of 500 pixels, a margin of 0 and auto, just to reset the margins of this and make it centered. And we're going to give it a margin bottom of 20 pixels, so it actually gives us space to scroll to the bottom. All right. And now we can target the labels. So in this case, we're going to say label display is block. Give it a margin bottom of 8 pixels. So if you notice now, our labels are actually above our text fields or inputs. And in this case, we're going to make the font weight bold, so our input is a lot more noticeable. All right. And that should be it for our label. Now we can move on to the different inputs that we want to style. So in this case, we could say input, and we could actually target the specific attribute that we want for this input. So since we're going to say input of type text, we're just going to look for inputs with the type of text. So it has to have this attribute to get targeted. But we could actually target it for multiple ones. And we could say this could be email. If you want, you could also include password. And in this case, we also have the number. And the last one, we included age, so it needs number. So now we're going to style this. And we could say the width is 95%. I'm going to give it a padding of 10 pixels. I'm going to give it a margin bottom of 15 pixels. A border. And we're going to give it a border of this grayish color, and a border radius of 4 pixels. If I could type it correctly, there you go. All right, now let's see what it looks like currently. And there you go. That actually looks pretty good, a lot better than before, where it just looked pretty default. And now we actually need to target this button. So this is going to be the last thing for our styling. So in this case, we're going to say button, and we're going to give it a font family because it doesn't take into account the font family of our body. We're going to have to set it ourselves and make it Arial as well. So in this case, we're going to make the font weight bold, a background color of blue, a color of white, this is the text color, a padding of 10 pixels by 15 pixels. So for our padding, it's going to have 10 pixels of padding for the top and bottom, and 15 pixels for the left and right. All right. And we're going to give it a border of none. We don't want it to have a border. And we're going to give it a border radius of 4 pixels. So you may be wondering why we could still do border radius if there's no border. So it's just going to curve it so it looks a little rounded. So you don't need to have a border to make an element look a little rounded. All right. And then after that, we're going to say the cursor is going to be a pointer every time we hover over this button. So we could see that it actually looks like we could click on this button and it's being signified that we can. All right. And the last thing we're going to do is have a hover event for this button. And we could give it a background color of this. This is going to be a darker looking blue. So now we can see when we're hovering over it, it's a lot more obvious. Okay, so that's actually it for our style. And we can see here that our HTML, compared to before, is now a lot more visually appealing. And we're able to change where things are on the website and change how they look. So that actually wraps it up for this video. In the next part, we're going to delve more into how we're going to manipulate this kind of page. And we're going to talk about structure, style, and behavior, and their relationships after we are able to finish this project. So once again, thank you for watching One Code Camp, and see you in the next video.